Hey everyone, it's Bevin. Welcome to Bevin, a femme over 40 and her friends podcast. I'm your host, Bevin. I've said my name 3 times. It's time to start the show. My co host, Biscuit Reynolds, imagine a flat faced Persian hanging out with me energetically because that's where he is. Today I want to talk about grieving my deadbeat dad and where I'm at. This has been 2 years, almost 2.5 years since he went to be with the goddess. He was a Gemini sun, born on May 24th, so I'm releasing this on his birthday. He's a Sagittarius moon, which means he was born he wasn't the day of the full moon, I think it was the day after. When I looked that up and I saw that my dad was a Sagittarius moon, the first thing I thought was, no wonder there was domestic violence in my parents' marriage. Because my mom is also a Sagittarius moon, and like when you get fire, the moon is your emotional body. And Sagittarius is a fire sign, so when you get fire with emotions, like you get big tempers. And when you get 2 big tempers together with not a lot of emotional maturity, who grew up in both violent alcoholic homes, you get what you get. But I wanted to talk today just about like where I'm at in the grieving process with my dad, because I have landed in a very sweet spot, and I know it's because of my emotional work on myself and my dad's connection to me as a spirit. First, before I get started, I just want to say and remind everyone the best way to support my podcast, which is all listener supported, is through my Patreon page, Patreon, patreon.com/FKDP, which stands for Fat Kid Dance Party, which is my aerobics class for anyone who feels left behind by mainstream fitness. If you've ever been called too much, too fat, or felt too awkward to dance, mine is the supportive class for you. I have so many things in my Patreon membership for folks, but mostly it's a great place for folks to support me. I still have folks in there at the $2 level who joined at the very beginning, and I'm so grateful for your ongoing support so that I can continue to make space in my time and my life to not trade time for money, but instead create content for free on the internet so that people can know there's a different way to think, because that's, I think, what each of us offer when we take the time to make our creations available to people, is just offering another way to think, another way to perceive the world. So patreon.com/FKDP. I'm doing a little bit of a revamp to be a little bit more intentional. My friend Jonathan Coe from my previous episode gave me the hot tip that during an astrology reading that we did together, that I needed to do some more spiritual teaching and spiritual coursework. And I really don't want to create another platform for people to join my work. Let's just do it on Patreon. So I'm going to set up my middle tier. My $17 tier is going to be like spiritual coursework that I am actively developing. And I've already put a lot of spiritual cool stuff that I don't share anywhere else on the Patreon, and it's going to move over to that tier. So if you want to study with me, and by study with me, I'm really just going to share my practice, and you can take what you like and leave the rest, just like I kind of do on this podcast. You take what you like and leave the rest. I always say quality of grief is quality of life, because the way we grieve things that aren't with us anymore on the earth plane, or aren't the way we wanted them to be, right? Like, there's so many things you can grieve. Something that I learned early on, I was going through the breakup of my first engagement, and a friend of mine slipped me a disc. Quite literally, she gave me a CD about grieving, and I was like, because I genuinely thought that grief only happened because of death and dying, and she had lost her partner because of death. And so she knew a lot about grief, and she identified what I was going through as grief, like the loss of this love relationship that I thought was a forever thing. And God, I had no idea how intense my codependency was back then, because I'm still unfolding levels and layers of codependency now. So like the fact that I had no idea what I was getting into with that healing, but here we are. Anyway, you can grieve a lot of things. And my dad passing away was not something I imagined I would have a lot of grief to process. But I think one of the wisest things I did, I don't think it was smart, I think it was just wisdom, applied experience, I did was anytime the thought would pop into my head, my dad is going to die someday. Because the way he treated his body, I'm kind of shocked that he lived to 73. But I knew he would die, and I kind of anticipated I would have a lot of responsibility to handle during that time. And I am so grateful that every time those thoughts rolled into my head, I did what I could control and chose different thoughts, because I'm like, I can't solve this now. We'll just see when it shows up. And you know what? Thank goddess he was the first of his 4 There were 4 siblings. The first of the 4 to pass because his siblings took care of everything. I didn't have to do anything but process my feelings. What up? Thank you to my aunt and uncles for handling that, because they didn't have to do anything. He didn't have anything to his name. He had long ago given me everything he wanted to give me, like my baby pictures. I have the video from his wedding with my stepmom, who I loved so, so much, Liz. She passed when I was 19 years old. And so it's just been really interesting, right? This grieving process and the way I choose to interact with it. And what's very cool, this is what I believe. You don't have to believe anything I believe. I'm just telling you what I believe in case it might help you, right? And that's kind of how I've performed and experienced my spirituality. My spiritual practice is just listening to other people talk about it and vibing with what vibes and gathering that, right? Like a little katamari of things with emotional resonance. And I really think that when people pass, frequently, this isn't always true, but frequently they release all that trauma stuff that made them an asshole in the earth realm, and they can be loving on the other realm. And I know there are lots of spirits that are not loving. I have a great episode with my friend Chrissy Tolley about demonic possession. You can learn all about that. But I am actually far more invested in and in this lifetime just working intentionally with light beings. And that's not to say I don't have tons of shadow work that I have done and continue to do. And it's not to say I don't have compassion for entities that aren't walking in the light, because I do. And actually that really kind of limits their power over and around me. But my intention is on the light. So when my dad passed, something I realized that had really kept him from loving me, and expressing his love for me. And it actually didn't keep him from loving me. It kept him it kept me from being able to feel his love for me, right? And it was trauma and shame that I could identify, you know? And as I continue to work through bell hooks, the will to change, and learn about how toxic masculinity really holds our men back from love, and how sad that is for them, I am really understanding my dad more. But I also understand we had a spiritual contract. Like, my father wound is something I was meant to heal and have in this lifetime because it made me stronger. And you know what? Like, some of us who grew up in single parent environments, like, we didn't have love and coddling. We had survival, and that has made us more of a badass warrior later in life, right? And like, if you had the privilege of loving parents who didn't have a lot of trauma to pass down to you, please leverage your privilege to be a better human. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of people don't realize the privilege they have is for them to step on and level up, you know? Anyway, but all that to say, my dad has said, like, okay, I choose every time I interact with like a spirit, you know, like, frequently when someone passes, like, you know, my friend Courtney passed, and I knew dragonflies were going to be my Courtney symbol. And so, like, whenever I see a dragonfly, I think of Courtney, and that's a connection I make with her. When my dad first passed, it was fog, because there was like fog that had come through. My dad lived in the Central Valley in Merced, and so the Thule fog would come in, and it's like fog so thick, it's really dangerous to drive in. It's actually really scary. So like, fog showed up for a while as my dad, and I still think of him when I see fog. But now it's been his cars, because I started noticing, because I've been like moving around more. Like, I've been out and about in the world more since like probably October of last year. I kind of just flipped a switch and was like, you know, the universe was calling me to go be more with people and do more with people things. So I've been driving more and seeing more cars thus. And so every time I would see, my dad had 2 cars in my lifetime that I remember. One from when I was a little girl, maroon Bug, Volkswagen Bug. You know, when you think slug bug, right? Or like they say slug bug when you see a bug. But I think I love you from my dad to me when I see a bug. And when I see his other car that he had just briefly, sometime in the 20 teens, he had this for like less than a year, but he had an HHR, I think is the car. It's like, I don't know, it looks just like a PT Cruiser. So anytime I see a car that looks like that, it was also maroon. And it's kind of like an SUV Bug in some ways, just the way it's shaped. So whenever I see one of those HHRs / PT Cruisers on the road, or Bug, I think of my dad, especially if it's like maroon. And so it's been interesting because, like, as soon as I started making that connection, it was on Day of the Dead last year, I made that connection, and I drove home from Port Townsend, and I'm wiggling my hand if you're not seeing the video, because it's a windy road coming out of Port Townsend, and I'm driving home right behind an HHR that was maroon, and I was like, oh my God, it's my dad, you know, here on Day of the Dead. And so it's just, I see him everywhere now, and it's like all sorts of random places. Like, I have been teaching monthly in Seattle, and the first 3 months of the year I taught right at the base of the Space Needle. So I was like schlepping into the city, and right below the Space Needle, and like there's a gas station kind of across the street from the Space Needle. And there was a maroon HHR just right there. I can't even make this up. I took a picture of it, but it's like right there underneath the Space Needle, right? And like last month when I was in Seattle, I was like driving by, and there's this like place called Bliss Medicine, and I love the word bliss, and I pay attention to it. And so I turned to the side, and there's another HHR just sitting there, right? So it's just like everywhere, and I just take it every time as I see it as an I love you from my dad. And like, I have to say, the frequency of I love yous I've gotten from my dad just since I started this practice of like noticing and recognizing and receiving that, because I think that's part of your spiritual development, is self-trust, intuition, is imagination. You know, like I think we're taught to, we're really trained out of our intuition by calling it imagination. That's just what it is. But actually, some of our greatest pop artists are drawing from the imaginal realm things that we want here on earth, right? And so just accept it. Just give yourself a chance, because like, what is it hurting me to see Volkswagen Bug as an I love you from my dead father? You know what I mean? And so like, I think I've gotten more I love yous from my dad in the last 9 months than in my entire adult life, maybe even in my entire life, right? Like, and I know how much my dad loved me. So it's just really cool to see this like transformative relationship, because like, I believe after someone leaves the earth realm, I'm not no longer in relationship with them. I'm just in relationship with them in a different way. And in some ways, like my folks who have passed, I have more connection to them now than in the previous life, because they didn't have quote time to call me, right? Or didn't make time to call me, or I didn't make time to call them, right? I could have talked to them much more. If I had known I wouldn't have them around, I would rearrange my whole life. If I had known my stepmom was going to pass at 19, I really do think like if I had gone, if I had, I deeply wanted to be a cheerleader in high school. I've probably told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. I deeply wanted to be a cheerleader in high school, and I did not try out for the team. And I remember the conscious thoughts I had at that time were, you don't have the money for the uniform, and you don't, you're fat, so you shouldn't and can't do that, right? That none of that is true. I could have figured out the money, and I could have, I can rhyme and clap and cheer, you know, I can do all of the things the cheerleaders were doing at that time. So anyway, it was just funny, like how easily it was for me to talk myself out of those things. And I know that the things I would have had to go through and the lessons I would have had to learn had I chosen to follow that desire path are things I'm now learning in my 40s. And I know with pretty good certainty, actually, and this was kind of revealed to me when I read Brandi Carlisle's memoir last year, is like, because she dropped out of high school. And you know what? She doesn't need her high school. She didn't need a high school education to do what she does. I don't need a high school education to do what I do. And yet here I am sitting on a law degree, which is really just like a very expensive receipt that I can't return, you know? So anyway, I have no like real regrets, because I know life is unfolding the way it's meant to, but I do see like that path where I dropped out of high school, where I would have moved in with Dad and Liz and pursued, you know, hairdressing and like some blue collar work so that I could support like my art and activism, which would have flourished, I think, if I had just released these notions of who I was stuffed into being and the lies I believed about my body and myself and my limitations. But it's all good, because if I was really meant to follow that path, like I believe decision making is a self-correcting process, right? But like knowing that I did not have as much time with my stepmom as I would have liked, it breaks my heart even still to think that she won't know my children on the earth realm, which I know she would have just loved. But what's been really interesting is like understanding the distinction of her spirit from my dad's spirit, because her spirit has never been that strong with me. But from what I understand with my connections with the other realms is that she reincarnated, and I think I'm just gonna say, who cares? I think she reincarnated as one of my stepbrother's kids, one of her son's children. And so when you're reincarnated, your spirit is not necessarily as strong on earth. And of course it depends on the spirit. This is what I've learned. So anyway, it's just interesting, right? Because like when I'm in the early part of my spiritual journey, I was just dying to hear from her. And I have heard from her in little bits and pieces, like over Mother's Day, after my mom was out of town for actual Mother's Day. So the night before Mother's Day, I was pet sitting, so I came onto the land to bring her a balloon and a card, and then we ended up having dinner, and it was really nice, and it was just spending some time with my mom, because that's all most people spell love Time, and they just want you to spend time with them. So I just spent some time with my mom, and then I was on the way back to my pet sit driving and just thinking about my stepmom and how much I wish to just, you know, she loved elephants. I would have given her an elephant tchotchke, and like then when I got back to my pet sit, the two things happened immediately. Number one, I went on a little walk at sunset around the trees. It was just a beautiful place to stay. And there were these trees planted around the perimeter of the property I was on, that like different magnolia trees and cherry blossom trees. And one of them was this white blossomed magnolia tree that was called an Elizabeth magnolia. So what are the chances that I'm noticing it for the first time in like 7 days? I had been on that pet sit. I was noticing it for the first time, and that there was even an Elizabeth magnolia tree to begin with, and that it was in full bloom. Like, it was all just, you know, more than a coincidence. And then like moments later, I'm binge watching Yellow Jackets, which I highly recommend. It's on Showtime/Paramount Plus. Such a good show. There's 2 seasons. They flow seamlessly together. It is excellently written, excellently acted. All of it is so good. It's a little bit gory, but gory in like a real way. If you were in a plane crash, these are the things you would see, you know? If you were living in the wilderness, these are the things you would see. I am not afraid of things about the occult and witchcraft and land spirits. So that if you're afraid of those things, I don't know if it's for you, but it was great. Anyway, Liz Fang is the name of somebody, like one of the writers or creators or something, and I paused it on her name. It just like randomly paused it to go to the restroom, and the credits were running, and it was just her name, so it was like Liz, and I was like, oh, because I had just asked while I was thinking about Liz for Mother's Day, like, let me think about, I'd love to hear from you, you know? And then I got those 2 signs in a row, and then the very next day I spent Mother's Day with my friends who had lost her son last October, and so this was her first Mother's Day with no earthly children, and so I brought her a balloon and a card and just spent some time with her. And at her house she had an elephant tchotchke with 3 little elephants, because I know signs come in threes. And then there were 3 little elephants, so it was like such a beautiful way to receive those signs from Liz. And it's just been really nice. Like, I've just been connecting to this idea of my dad, like and the idea of like living a good quality of life. I just have to say, I spent my therapy appointment today talking to my therapist about my experience of my quality of life right now, because I've never felt so much satisfaction in the mundane. And I say mundane because it's mundane to other people, but for me, like, hanging out with my hummingbird feeder is everything. Hanging out in the forest is everything. And like allowing that to be enough and not needing exogenous change, you know? I think we're really wired for outside approval, which means outside circumstances, which means we're not done until the patriarch says we're good. And in fact, they're always moving the ball, so like, you're never good. Let's think about like body stuff and how we're wired to hate old bodies, and yet we're all aging, like, and we're participating in this losing scheme. You can just choose exit from that, and just choose to love the body you have right now because of what it can do for you right now. And so I feel like that's a level I've gotten to with productivity in life, and just understanding I don't need some external moment for this moment to be enough. And Eckhart Tolle teaches that accept every moment as though you chose it, even though there's lots of shit that I would not choose that are happening right now, especially in the year of our goddess 2024. But here I am, and I know that I do more with my good feelings than I do with sour grapes about the past, or sour grapes about what's not happened yet, right? Like, anxiety is stressing about the future, depression is stressing about the past. So being in the present moment, being in the now moment. And part of being in the now moment is releasing all the things that happened in the past. So like, as hard as it was to be an abandoned little girl who didn't have her dad's love that she craved so much, as hard as it was, in ways I'm still untangling, as hard as it was to be in the womb and as a small infant with domestic violence happening around me, and not just like physical violence, but also the yelling and the anger, you know, and like how wired we are through the umbilical cord to our mother's emotions and knowing what my mom's emotions are like today, let alone what they were like, you know, 45 years ago, you know, like when I was in her womb experiencing her emotions as a little baby empath, like, right? I can leave all of those stories behind and just be here in the now moment, where my dad takes the time as a spirit. And I think he's really finding it fun. My dad's a jovial spirit. I think he's really finding it fun ways to delight me, and very focused on me. Whereas I know like Liz has her other two sons to focus on and reincarnated. So it's been cool, this energy with my dad. And so it's like, I'm actually really excited to share with you this experience of grief, because I think you can have it too if you choose, and develop in that way. And of course, like, I still experience like tragic crying grief about my cat. And I just want to point out, I got more cards about my deadbeat dad passing than I did about my cat, and my cat was there for me like more than 1,000% than my dad, you know, in life. But it's all good, because people just aren't wired to acknowledge pet grief and pet loss in the same way that I understand it to be. And so that's just going to make me more, regret is a good teacher, so it's just going to make me more attuned to my friends who have lost their beloved pets, and checking in on them and sending cards and all of that kind of thing. So I hope this helps. I think my dad would be really jazzed that I'm remembering his birthday on the birthday, May 24th, 7 months before mine. 24 is my lucky number. I love the 24th of the month. It's always full of possibility. And also, one of my favorite astrologers, Colin Bedell of Queer Cosmos, was born on the 24th. So the same day as my dad. So it's just fun to like celebrate the Geminis in my life who were born on my dad's birthday, because I always think that's like very special. And Geminis, I have to say, Geminis and Libras really want you to remember their birthday. Like, really. Everyone loves when you remember their birthday, but like certain people are like more like hiding in plain sight about it. But like, I will say Geminis and Libras, like, this is why Geminis frequently have big birthday parties, just saying. So happy birthday, Dad, in spirit. And thanks to all of you for tuning into this. I hope this was valuable. If you have questions for me, podcast ideas, please send me an email, fatkiddanceparty@gmail.com. I am here for you. I want to make content that is resonant and relevant. I also blog at queerfatfemme.com. That is also a free resource paid for by my beloved and magical and marvelous Patreon supporters. And if you don't want to join a membership, you can always just buy me a snack. The links are in the show notes. You can buy me something cute for my Amazon wish list. Thank you to everyone who Venmo'd me after my episode with Bianca Russo, where she pew 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 announced my Venmo a bunch of times. I am going to get a massage shortly. I just got to find a masseuse. And I love you all so much. Thanks for being here.